Sorry, I think we may be having some technical difficulties. Just a minute. While we wait, everyone can also start introducing themselves in the chat if you'd like. We have participants coming from all parts of the world here.
Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever we all are coming from. And in behalf of the Gender and Trade Coalition, WIDE, and APWLB, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out from your busy days to join our webinar today entitled Chaotic Times in Global Trade, Gendered Intersections of Trade and Militarism. So to start our webinar, just to frame the discussion today, we know that the world is witness to massive turmoil in the arena of international trade, with trade wars among countries and arbitrary tariffs imposed by the world's richest country, which is the US. So these economic interests are fueling competition over markets and resources and sources for raw materials, and rationalized as a means to counterbalance adversaries, and these have undoubtedly heightened global geopolitical tension. So with countries increasing their defense budget, with the global economy in turmoil, and with the ongoing genocide in Palestine, the ongoing Ukraine war, and the current Iran and Israel conflict, we are indeed in very chaotic, uncertain times. So this webinar responds to these challenges that we face by providing a platform to converse around these issues in global geopolitics, to understand what the current geopolitical moment means to our communities, to women, to indigenous peoples, and other marginalized and vulnerable peoples of the world, and how, of course, the global tide of militarism and trade wars further create inequalities and oppressions among peoples and countries. So without further ado, we'd like to start with our webinar, but first I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jom Salvador. I am from the Philippines, from the organization Gabriela, a women's rights organization in my country, and also part of the Women Interrogating Trade and Corporate Hegemony program of the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development. I will moderate today's webinar. So to proceed, we have per day, and we will be asking each one of them to share in their views on the topics that are assigned to them. And after the four speakers, we will have a dedicated time for question and answers. So please do take note of all your questions, your comments, or reflections, and we'll have dedicated time for that after we hear from our four speakers with their rich inputs in today's session. So to start our session, I'd like to call on our first speaker, who will be discussing about the intersections of trade and militarism, and will provide us with a closer look into the Middle East as a site of contention and the role of the IMEC, or the India-Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, and what does the ongoing situation mean for women and for different communities. So I'd like to call on our speaker, Dr. Azra Talat Said, She is the executive director of Roots for Equity, an organization that works with communities fighting for social and economic and environmental justice in Pakistan. And for more than 2 decades, Azra's work has centered around crises faced by small and landless farmers that are denied political and economic rights due to neoliberalism, including consistent problems faced under protracted global economic crisis. Azra is also a member of the Regional Council of APWLD and works as part of the Women Interrogating Trade and Corporate Hegemony Program Organizing Committee of APWLD. She is also currently working with the International League of People's Struggles as its Secretary General. So Azra, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joms. Hello, everybody. So I will not repeat. I'm afraid to open my camera because I'm actually traveling in a bus, and I hope the connection remains good all the way through. Could we share my presentation, Sanila?
Yes, it's up on the screen, Azra.
Okay, somehow I don't see it very well. I can just work through my own computer. So really, we are, as John has already said, we are in extremely difficult times in every possible way. I think every norm that we had in the past 50 years of talking about human rights, everything has been shattered. And the entire context of state and nationhood is now really in doldrums, and the faith remains in the people.
Sorry, Azra, the connection is a bit
fact
tricky.
is
Can you turn off your...
where we have Yes, I can, if I can figure out how. Okay, okay. I did. Is this better now?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Is an example of how people are standing up. So with that, I will really get into the presentation, which is I'm going to talk about the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor. That's my first slide. And this agreement was launched in 2023 at the G20 summit in New Delhi. It has two corridors, the Eastern Corridor and the Northern Corridor. It's basically an economic trade agreement between many different parts of the world, between India and then which include certainly Saudi Arabia, the US, Jordan, Bahrain, Zionist entity, Italy, and then also the United States. So it's going to be linked through two different forms of mode of transport. From India to Dubai, it will be a sea route, and then inland through the Middle East up till Israel, and from there again by sea to Europe. This was really a mind-blowing agreement because it included countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel at the same time. Can we go to the next page? which shows the map and also shows the. So very quietly they came out with this agreement, and it's in actuality for the Muslim world.
Hello, Asra, we cannot hear you, so maybe we can come back to you in a bit. Would that be okay?
Okay. I thought it was my internet connection fluctuating on me. But yeah, Azra. Okay. So we really want to hear about what Azra has to say about the topic, but I guess for technical problems, while hopefully she tries to fix the problem, can we now, sorry, but just to conserve on our time, can we, for the moment, ask our second speaker? Nick, I hope you are ready to jump in. And we'll get back to Azra's sharing in a little while. But for the moment, we would like to hear about the situation in the Pacific, especially as it becomes a clear convergence point of many military and trade aspects in global politics, especially with AUKUS and Quad. And we would like to hear also about how US President Donald Trump's executive orders on deep sea mining also increases military presence apart from extractive activities, economic activities in the Pacific region. And also want to hear about how this impacts women and other indigenous peoples communities, especially in the Pacific. So to give us a discussion into that, we'd like to call on Miss Monica Nick Flores. She is a queer Chamorro artist and activist from Guam. Nick organizes Would Protehi Guahan to confront harms from militarization and colonialism imposed in the Marianas Archipelago and the Pacific, as well as also Nick works with Marianas for Palestine. Nick also serves as a board member of Water Protector Legal Collective. So, Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joms and Sanilla and everybody at APWLD who have coordinated this event along with comrades from the other partnering organizations with us tonight. It's an honor to be here. Definitely a little intimidated. I don't want to pretend that I am an expert on any of the topics that I'm going to talk about. I just want to be transparent about that. I am a grassroots activist from Guahan, looking at the impacts of militarism in our archipelago, the Marianas Archipelago, but also in the broader Pacific. And these are all such huge issues that we're tackling. It's an overwhelming time. We're watching, the rise of fascism in the United States, the world's most powerful country, and the rise of fascism everywhere. Increased policing of people, silencing of dissent, increased hostility towards immigrants, and increased violence to many different community groups throughout society, you know, from immigrants to trans and LGBTQ folks, to people who live in colonies. And that's where I'm kind of calling in from. I'm calling in from a US military colony in Guam. You know, just to give you some context, Guam, or Guahan, which means we have in our native language, is a military colony of the United States. We're part of the Marianas Archipelago. We are separated from the Northern Islands because of a colonial history. After the Spanish-American War, we became, you know, a ward of the United States, or we became subjugated by the United States, and we maintain to be a colony. We have no voting representation in Congress. We do not vote for the president. At the same time, every single thing the president decides and the United States decides unilaterally affects us, and it goes against our rights to free, prior, and informed consent as indigenous peoples. And so, you know, I feel like I'm talking to a group that knows a lot about these topics already. So I just want to start off, you know, by kind of thinking about a little bit about Trump, because, you know, we're here in a military colony of the United States as indigenous people of these lands, trying to resist the continued occupation, exploitation, contamination, destruction of our homeland, really our own annihilation. You know, it's very different from what's happening in Palestine or Myanmar and other parts of the world. While we do not live, you know, under the threat of a potential air raid, or even looking under the barrel of a gun tomorrow from, you know, military and police forces, we're basically being set up to be a site for war again. We were occupied by the Japanese imperial forces during World War II, and faced a brutal recapture of the United States, which meant that they carpet bombed our island. And because of our colonial history, detaching us from the Northern Marianas, the United States treated the Northern Marianas, who were subjugated under Japanese colonization, as you know, prisoners of war, as enemies of war. And so our experiences under US colonization are different, and our statuses are also different, and the economic impacts are also different. But we really tend, you know, our organization, Protege Guahan, we do a lot of work with our Commonwealth 670 that our friend Isa Arreola is the chair of. And we are constantly looking at economic impacts and other social impacts, such as burdens on our healthcare system. We are an extremely vulnerable community medically. Our medical services are extremely underdeveloped. Much of Micronesia was left extremely underdeveloped after US occupation. It's important to mention that in Micronesia, you know, the Compacts of Free Association, which were established after World War II, which you know, were made with sovereign countries of Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia, all allow the United States to occupy air, land, and sea at any time for military purposes. And so, you know, I just want to show a few quick slides, but I just wanted to start off by also saying that as colonial, you know, as colonial subjects, as people under US military occupation, we really have to pay attention to what's happening in the United States. Sometimes, unfortunately, there's a disconnect, but every decision that is made in the United States is a unilateral one. We do not have a say in the things that affect us. And just earlier this week at the United Nations, President Trump attacked the climate crisis, calling it a green scam. And this is the largest security issue for the broader Pacific region. He said a bunch of other things that were very shocking and alarming, really historically shameful moment of the United States at the United Nations. And, you know, this is the same president who is cutting public programs, including food programs, medical programs like Medicaid and Medicare, to beef up, to increase the budget for the military. He's also renamed the Department of Defense Department of War, which at least is more accurate in what it does. But He's increasing it by $1 trillion. He's increasing the budget for ICE, right? Who are basically kidnapping people off the streets, kidnapping migrants off the streets, tearing families apart, imprisoning people without due process, and people are dying. They're being murdered in these facilities, being tortured in these facilities. He's beefing them up, that budget up for ICE, and so we're seeing an increase, a massive increase in military spending. What I appreciate about the renaming, going back to the name of Department of War, is not only is it more accurate, but we really need to break down the words that we use and refuse to say things like defense and instead say things like the Pentagon, or now the Department of War, because really what the United States has done in the Pacific is try to establish a more offensive position, not a defensive position, at the same time setting up island chains to defend the mainland. And we just hosted a defense forum here, which was such a highly abusive situation where Indo-PACOM basically got up on the stage and with a few of our local government officials to just provide us a bunch of lip service and propaganda to justify the need for the island chains and to say that war with China is inevitable. It's really interesting that the United States is willing to enter into a war with China over Taiwan for Taiwan's sovereignty, however, refuses to acknowledge its occupation and refusal to grant sovereignty to its colonies in the Pacific, including Guam and the Northern Marianas and Hawaii. We can also say that the United States has, even though they're not legally defined as colonies, colonial and very coercive relationships with the Compact of Free Association countries, like I mentioned earlier, as well as other parts of the Pacific where they have the presence of military bases that have been extremely disruptive to their communities, causing increases in violent crime, sexual violence, and environmental degradation, destruction of sacred areas in places like Korea, Okinawa, Japan. And so it's really important that we take a look at, the broader impacts throughout Micronesia, throughout the Asia Pacific region. That forum was really a way to sell Indo-PACOM to our community. It was an extremely expensive event, mostly military and government officials forced to attend. The very, very few community members were able to attend. And there was only one comment voicing dissent, and that was me. And they immediately shut down a conversation after that, took a break, and silenced any other dissent from happening. But I'm just going to jump to some slides real quick. Sorry, just 1 second. Oh, but before I do that, it looks like I might have. Before I share that, let me just say, so, a lot of you know what some of these, some of this is. Sorry, just 1 second. I'm having technical difficulty now myself. So Trump attacked the climate crisis. It is the main security issue for the Pacific. And, when we look at things, like Quad, right, which, we know was just like revamped in the last few years, last 8 years. It's the Quad is the quadrilateral security dialogue among the United States, Australia, India, and Japan. So these happen to also be like imperialist countries that also occupy and have military installations in other parts of, the Pacific. And the United States has bases in Australia as well. But they've sort of framed themselves as like this protector of democracy in the Pacific and trying to prevent or trying to prepare for conflict with China. However, one of the things with AUKUS, right? AUKUS is a partnership with Australia, the United Kingdom, and the U.S. And it started under the Biden administration in 2021. Originally, Australia was supposed to purchase non-nuclear subs from France, But Australia couldn't wait. They really wanted nuclear subs, and they wanted them quick, and they very abruptly changed the agreement with France to enter into agreement with the United States. They've already started paying the United States to produce these nuclear-powered submarines. It's a slow process, and they won't be delivered. It's basically a 30-year plan, a multi-billion-dollar plan, about $368 billion over 30 years. That the Australian government's paying for to produce subs both in the United States and in Australia. It's supposed to make contractors and weapons manufacturers in the United States richer. What's really interesting, though, is the Trump administration has been trying to dismantle a lot of the things that the Biden administration had lined up. And some of us in the Pacific were a little hopeful he would come after AUKUS and say, oh, since the Biden administration started AUKUS, we're going to do away with it. And he kind of has with his America First agenda. It's just 6 months ago in an interview when the UK Prime Minister was visiting the United States, Trump basically admitted he didn't even know what AUKUS meant. He wasn't aware of it. And that was quite shocking for Australia, who had already spent, a lot of money to order these submarines. They want these nuclear-powered submarines because they're supposed to be faster and keep people at sea a lot longer than traditional submarines. And so it's been really interesting watching the Australian government scramble after a statement like that from Trump, who basically didn't know what AUKUS meant, but also an appointee for an undersecretary of the Department of War was also questioning if it's in the best interest of the United States to supply these submarines. And maybe they shouldn't be in Australia, but maybe somewhere even closer to China, like Japan or Taiwan. And so, in February of this year, China had a live fire drill in the Tasman Sea between New Zealand and Australia. And so it kind of triggered this fear. But there's a huge divide about the benefits of AUKUS even in the Australian government. Like, for instance, some people think it's a vital security boost. But some people are afraid it's going to drag Australia into conflict with China also. It's really important to mention that while the US is considered the most important security or strategic partner of Australia, China is its biggest trading partner. And so they're torn. Even the country is torn if AUKUS is going to be, something that they're basically going to waste a lot of money on, while a lot of the needs of the people are being neglected. Things like housing, education, healthcare, as they bulk up their defense, budget to create these submarines. But at the same time, we can see that parallel in the United States as well, that they're bulking up the military budget and cutting programs, all kinds of programs. And so there's a lot of worry that the United States might leave Australia high and dry without any submarines, because building submarines takes so long, and maybe it won't leave enough submarines for the United States to dominate the Pacific. So those are just some of the things that are being said. It's important. I do want to share, let's see if I can get my slides going now. I did want to share that a lot of the decisions that are being made about AUKUS, about the expansion of military presence in the Pacific, and even about deep sea mining, a lot of them are made without consent. And it's so important that we talk about this. This is a right, a fundamental right of Indigenous people, right? Allowing Indigenous folks to give or withhold consent for projects or activities that affect our lands, territories, and resources. And it encompasses our right to be consulted, participate in decisions, and maintain control of our ancestral lands, ensuring that consent is given voluntarily, well in advance, and with full understanding of the potential impacts. And none of this is being done for any of these issues, both the increased military presence and AUKUS and deep sea mining. I just wanted to share this map really quick. I share this all the time, and it's from one of the best, it's not even one of the best publications, but it's a really good map, because all the way over here you see this is the bottom this is the United States, North America, United States. And there's 3 island chains. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these are supposed to be like these defensive chains for the United States, but actually all of these places in the chains are becoming sites of US force projection, in the Pacific. And so the 3rd island chain includes Hawaii, American Samoa, and New Zealand. The 2nd island chain includes Guam, the Northern Marianas Islands, Yap, and Palau, which are both experiencing huge military expansion as well. They want to use the Northern Marianas, Yap, and Palau for storage, for refueling sites, but also for what are called like divert airfields. There's a divert airfield being built in Tinian in the Northern Marianas Islands, and that is because Guam is such a target because of the bases here. If we should be attacked in a conflict, that all of their resources here can be easily relocated to these other islands. And then the 1st island chain includes Japan, Okinawa, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Singapore, and Australia is right here. And so this idea that, the United States is gonna fund that Australia is going to purchase these submarines from the United States and build some on their own. That is to sort of be to defend supposedly Australia from any conflict here, but also it's going to drive them into potential conflict. And then I wanted to show this map because if we're talking about submarines, nuclear powered submarines, especially in the Pacific, these are already places in the island chains where the United States has submarines. And so this is also a map from Newsweek that just came out this month. So this is Hawaii. Australia has 3 submarines, and so the green dots are like visiting or moving, right? They're not permanent. We have a permanent sub stationed here in Guam, a Virginia class nuclear sub, and then this one is a yellow. Sorry, I think I got it wrong. The blue is permanent. The green is the green is visiting, and the yellow is rotational. And so it's really important to already show how, the U.S. submarine force in the Pacific, including Australia, it's already quite expansive. And there's already been some issues with the nuclear sub here actually leaking nuclear radiation, nuclear contamination. It's been reported that it's so small that it's negligible, but we in the Pacific don't buy that. A lot of us are very uncomfortable with the dumping of nuclear or contaminated radiated water from the Fukushima catastrophe, and so from Japan. And so a lot of us don't believe that that's a negligible amount of radiation being leaked from those subs, and that didn't just happen in Guam. That happened in Hawaii. It happened as the subs were transiting from Guam to Hawaii, and so that's just one of the many issues. Now with deep sea mining, this opens us up even to more struggle because and it's important to mention that the Quad has an investment network called Quinn, which launched in 2022. It's a private sector-led platform that brings investors, corporations, and public institutions from Quad countries to accelerate investment in critical and emerging technologies. So right there, we can see a connection between the Quad countries and the issue of these minerals as a top priority for their strategic collaboration. And the thing is these critical minerals, these rare earth minerals found in the seabed, they're highly sought out by weapons companies. They are increasingly being used for U.S. military purposes, especially for advanced weapon systems, laser precision guided weapons, remote weapon systems, and the minerals include cobalt, nickel, copper, and other rare earth elements. And so we're seeing a race to access these deep sea minerals. It's as the new arms race. It's fueling a new arms race. And while it promises, rapid economic advancement for different countries in the Pacific, we can also consider that as selling their sovereignty. And for a lot of Pacific people, we have stories that start with our creation from and within the ocean, or stories that, are about us being in a canoe, being the first people going to the Pacific. So the ocean is our ancestor. The ocean has, some of our first people come from the ocean. Some of our stories, our ancestors go to the ocean when they die. And this is something that connects so many Pacific people, from stories of navigation, of settlement, and stories of creation. And so we really have so much to lose, economically, politically, as we, as specific nations are pressured to open up for deep sea mining. They're also selling their sovereignty. That's a new form of colonization, even though it's supposedly supposed to support their independence. And we have to be careful, because other things that are kind of packaged as like green energy alternatives are being used to justify this horrible environmental destruction, which is irreversible. There's not enough information about deep sea mining for Native people to make free, prior informed consent. And that's also why it's a violation. Only propaganda about deep sea mining is being given to Pacific peoples, just like propaganda for military occupation is. And so this is just one way that all of these things are connected: the Quad, deep sea mining, and US military expansion. And so, what it looks like for women in the Pacific, women have been resisting military occupation and war, using land and ocean for purposes of war for a very long time. And we can look at many examples of that, from the Philippines to Okinawa to even Palau, it was really women who led the resistance for a nuclear policy there, and so we're also fighting the use of nuclear reactors here in Guam for a missile defense system. This is something that there's also no transparency about. We keep finding that we're given information that nuclear power generation is not something the military is looking at, but then we find it in the NDAA, the Defense Authorization Act, right? Which lays out the budget for the Pentagon, that it's there. And so we know that there's a history of underreporting. We have the facts about it here, and it's like that basically anywhere the United States military has a base. There's a history of underreporting, of incidents of desecration of ancestral burials, of spills, harmful spills, and all kinds of contamination. And so this is a beast. This is a monster that we really have to fight. The military-industrial complex is like a net that's choking the planet, and we have to figure out a way to pull at the threads of that net every single day. And so resisting deep sea mining is one, resisting expansion of US military bases is one, and those things are extremely connected. I don't know where I'm at with time. If someone can just, can just share where I'm at with time, but I think I covered all my key points there. And, just to say, sometimes it feels hopeless. It feels hopeless that we can't beat this monster, this the Leviathan that is the military-industrial complex, which is absolutely connected to capitalism and all of this extractive industry, this destructive industry that is, attached to weapons manufacturers and war making, in the constant cycle of keeping us in war. So I'll leave it there. And thank you all so much for listening. It's an honor to be here and a privilege to be here with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It is also an honor for us to be hearing about perspectives from Pacific and resource extraction and military buildup, especially in the Pacific region, and also for reminding us that women have had a long history of resistance and taking up the current challenges of standing up against further militarism and colonization in our lands and our. So thank you, Nick. I'd like to call Azra Said again to continue with the discussion. Azra, are you there? Azra, can you hear us?
I am, yes, Jams. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Azra.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, I've just wrote it up because my connection is so bad. What I'm going to do is just read through what I am going to say and hope that I'm clear and people can see the slides as I go. So I've already pointed out the issue with what IMIC is. It's a trade agreement, and between Gulf countries, India and Europe and the United States. I will not go into what it was earlier, but just point out that currently there is a new digital trade agreement which was signed in 2024 as part of IMIC. And I'll just concentrate on this because my connection is so bad, and then I would really like to make my point clear. So when we come to this topic of digital trade, I think part of what Nick has said is highly connected to what I'm saying.
Sorry, I think Azra has dropped off again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Azra, we can hear you.
Yes, Azra, please go ahead.
Joms, maybe we can go to another speaker and then wait for Azra.
Okay, really
Yeah.
sorry.
Hello. Hello, I'm back.
Okay.
Okay, so what
Right.
I've done is I've sent a piece out to Sanila and Rose. If I leave, can you read from that what I've sent? In any case, I will just go on, and the digital trade is very critical to look at because when you talk about digital trade, it means you need many mines and minerals, cobalt, copper, graphite. You need servers, you need computers, you need telecommunication equipment. And all of this is hinged to mining. And the other point I really want to make is that who owns now mines and ports in the world? And these are very big, large groups. I will speak about Adani. Adani holds 70% of Israeli port in Haifa, and 30% is owned by an Israeli group called Gadot. Adani also has significant mining operations in India. It has gone into agreements and partnerships to set up a weapons and defense aerospace industry in the country. and is exploring minerals. Last year, NATO came out with a list of 12 very critical minerals for its so-called weapons industry. And among them, the top were aluminium and bauxite. Now, India, wherever you have Adivasis, there is a lot of bauxite, especially, and bauxite is the basic primary ore from which aluminium is created. If you look at figures, graphite China dominates 69% of the global production of graphite, while India has 12%. And then bauxite, which is the primary ore for aluminium, is from Australia, China, India. All of them have large reserves. And as Nick said, the Americans have, the US, especially Trump, has reactivated its Offshore Critical Minerals Dominance Act of 2025. So it basically means that if you look at IMEC is really creating a long trade route from India all the way up to the United States. And what they are after is, of course, the trade routes. And they are also after the minerals, which includes oil and gas. And now we have these critical minerals, and I will not go into details. I'll just go to something which I found on the net. It says between 21st April to 11 May this year, Indian troops killed 31 people, including 60 women, who were supposed to be Maoist rebels fighting against the Indian state in Bastar, central India. The killings are part of a project called Operation Kaga, launched in January of last year. So loosely translated, it's the final mission. The Indian government said they had deployed tens of thousands of troops, combat drones and helicopters, gunships to search for and annihilate an armed resistance still holding out against corporate theft and takeover of one of India's most mineral-rich parts of the country. This is what it is all about. No matter whether it is the Pacific Ocean, whether it is the Indian Ocean, whether it is South Asia, or it is Southeast Asia, or it is West Asia, it is occupied Palestine. The hunt by capitalism, by imperialism, is for resources. And when they talk about bilateral trade agreements, or they talk about multilateral trade agreements, it is really to ensure that they have total control over our lands and our resources, over our waters. I don't have the time, and my connection is so bad. So I don't think I have the time to talk about what is now called the blue economy. The blue economy is also to go deep down into the ocean to search for these critical minerals. So I will just end here and say that IMIC and the devastation of Gaza, I don't need to repeat it at all. I think there's nobody on this earth who's left who doesn't know what is happening in Gaza, what kind of a genocide, ecocide is happening. We know that the global Sumut flotilla has already been hit on twice or thrice. There are 28,000 people involved in that flotilla, and the Israelis will have no qualms in killing them. So I will end with that. I feel that the only way to go ahead is for the people to stand up and rise. And there is no other way. Our states who have nuclear weapons, Pakistan has nuclear weapons, India has nuclear weapons, have the Pakistan.
Yes.
So as a Muslim state, has Pakistan tried to go and help people in Gaza? Have the Saudis, who are supposed to be the biggest Islamic state in the world, done anything to help the people of Gaza? No, so our states have failed. No, we cannot depend on our states anymore. What we have to do is to unite, create extremely staunch support for each other, combine as women, collect as people, collect as indigenous people, build solidarities across the masses. As Naik started with, that she is a grassroots woman, does not have expertise. I don't think we have expertise, but we have the will to fight for our rights. We know what our rights are. We know what we claim for our lands. And we know that a sane world is only possible through the collective action of the people and the women. So I will end there, and I really apologize for my very bad connection, and I feel very bad. But I hope I was a bit, I was able to say something on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azra. Despite the difficulties in connections, we hear you loudly when you talk about how throughout history and wherever we are in the world, that the hunt of imperialism is really for our resources, and that fuels even widening militarism and violation of many of our rights as peoples, especially also how it relates to the politics in Middle East and South Asia, and also linking that to Nate's presentation earlier about further extraction within the blue economy framework, and for highlighting once more that transnational and cross-border solidarity is really necessary to address and challenge the persistent systems of militarism and injustices that we all experience as peoples and women of the world. So thank you so much, Azra. And at this point, I'd like to call on our next speaker, Eva Zilen, who will be discussing about NATO and how increases in its budget impacts on peoples. And our next speaker, I am honored to call on Eva, who is the senior advisor and one of the co-founders of the organization Fina Till Fina Foundation, which is an organization that works for women's rights in conflict areas. And since her organization's establishment in 1993, in response to the widespread sexual violence during the Balkan Wars, Eva has played a pivotal role in shaping its vision and support and peace-building efforts in conflict-affected regions. So without further ado, I'd like to call on Eva as our next speaker. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And I'm going to say, if Naik said that she wasn't an expert in what she was going to say, I don't know who is, but I am not an expert on NATO, but I think we do have people here that could help. So I will talk about militarization and aid, and then Edwin will come after me and talk more about militarization and trade, because trade is not my issue at all. And I think it's good to follow on what has been said. I think we have gone back to a time when security seems to be only talked about in military terms, although we do know, I mean, you could just listen to Naik, for instance, that there are so many other threats that is happening right now, like the democratic backlash, the war against human rights, the climate change, obviously, the anti-gender, the anti-rights movement, and the constant sort of unbalance in who gets to make decisions. Still, we are talking a lot about military, and that military will, in many ways, that's the only thing that will save us. I think from my part, I sit in Sweden right now, in Stockholm. That is a NATO country nowadays. And I think also that you can say that we, as many others of the NATO countries, at least, are driven by a politics of fear. We are all the time feeded with that the war is coming very, very soon. And in Sweden, historically, it's very easy to be afraid of Russia. And now we are very afraid of Russia. But we also have the impact of the US that we already have heard of. First of all, because of the cuts, because they killed USAID. And that meant that many of the other countries have now stepped in also when it comes to humanitarian aid. And I would say that also affects what is left for women's rights organization or any other work for gender equality, for democracy, for climate change, I would say, because the humanitarian comes first. But also the fact that the US is pushing their agenda to the rest of the world when it comes to what words to be used. Right before this, I was talking to a couple of activists that are working in a very difficult area of the world. And they were now forced to spend time and effort to find new words on what they were working with, because they were going to work together with UNDP, and UNDP have to report to the government of that country, and therefore they can't use any words like gender or feminism or any of the normal words that they are usually using. So all of this, I think, have a big effect on what type of development aid we see today. The spending that goes down in many of the rich countries, like Sweden, and many of the NATO countries are cutting their development aid. For Sweden in particular, we are also cutting the aid from many parts of the world. We are focusing on Ukraine right now, which is good in many ways, but it also means that our development aid for Asia is soon diminishing to almost nothing. The Middle East has gone down, I think, with 45% the last years, and in Africa is the same. So we are spending less and less, and we are spending more of it on humanitarian aid rather than building democracies or building any type of other security than a military security. And we have seen, I mean, it's not only countries. I mean, Sweden is one of the countries who have cut funds and also funds for gender equality. The Netherlands, who were a big donor, is also one of them, but there are also, from the philanthropy side, Sigrid Browsing Trust used to be really strong on gender equality, does not have that anymore as one of their goals, and neither have Open Society, I think. So there is a lot of things happening where the money for gender equality, for women's rights, for democracy, I would say, because I think you can't have democracy without having a gender perspective of it, are constantly going down. And we know that military spending is not ODA. It says, by definition, military spending is not ODA, as ODA aims to promote economic development and welfare in developing countries. So military aid should be excluded, but we have also seen in the last few years that that could also be a lot of gray areas. So what is included in what countries call their contribution then to ODA and their development aid might not be what we would consider it. And I think also a worrying trend is that the UK has been very bluntly saying that because they need to up their military budget, they are decreasing their development aid budget. And I think many others have been doing that, but they have been doing that without actually being open with it. So maybe we should be glad that one country is open with it. But I also think that that means that more countries might follow, because NATO has decided to up their game. And again, the US has a big say there, that they have said that they don't want to fund as much. So now all the European countries, which are all quite have been quite important when it comes to who is contributing to development aid, inclusive the EU, I would say. Now they need to put more and more money into their military, which means that we are losing money for other things. And for just to, again, Sweden as an example, a lot of our development aid are going to Ukraine, and a lot of it is humanitarian. And we actually, or a women's organization or a women's network in the Ukraine did look like it's the place where most money are going right now, I think, in the world. So does anything come to women's rights organization? And the answer is very, very little. And very short-term projects, sometimes 3 months, sometimes 6 months. They are very much pushed into doing humanitarian work rather than any other work. And we are losing sort of the funds even where the most money are going, which is very, very scary. So I think having listened to those speakers before me, it also feels a bit hopeless. And I agree. I think we need to stand up and ask for a totally new world order, basically. But I think also we need to call out what is happening. So if we are constantly saying that more money, I can just say in my country, there are no questions whether more money for the military would come from. So obviously, if you spend a lot of money on the military, then there will be less money for other things, both within your country, but also when it comes to development aid. And our development aid is much like, I would say, the US and all other Western rich countries. We are now saying that it should benefit ourselves. And in the Swedish new reform agenda for development aid, we don't talk anymore about listening to the need of the people, the poor. We've always said that it should be like eradication of poverty, and poverty in a broad sense, and that has totally been skipped. So we are getting less and less money. The military are getting so much money that they don't really know what to do with it. And this is a trend that seems to be ongoing. And we also need to stop having a politics built on fear and more built on facts. So Edme, over to you.
Thank you, Eva, for that intervention and telling us how less and less spending on development aid and gender equality really is the other side of the ongoing increases in military spending and diversion of public funds towards military spending and increased military budgets in NATO countries, especially in Europe. So, and calling out, and the need for us to continue calling out our governments and on this situation and trends. Thank you so much. And at this point, we'd like to call on our last speaker, Edme Dominguez, who will be talking about, to talk further about the intersections of militarism and trade and what an increase in NATO budget means to international trade and for women's rights. Edme is Associate Professor in Peace and Development Studies and has worked for more than 30 years as lecturer in Latin American Studies, Gender Studies, and Global Political Economy at the School of Global Studies at the University of Gothenburg. And during the last 20 years, she has been working and publishing on the social and gender implications of the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement for Mexico, on gender issues related to citizenship, political participation, labor, transnational activism, and free trade agreements, particularly in the case of Mexico, El Salvador, and Bolivia. She is also chairwoman of the Gender and Development in Practice and has been a member of the board of WIDE, where she has been active for several years and nowadays coordinates the working group of gender and trade. Over to you, Edme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also want to start thanking the organizers for inviting me. And originally I was not going to speak, but when Eva became the speaker about how aid cooperation has diminished, I mean, we wanted to have a link with trade, and then we agreed with Eva that I could complete a little bit the scenario she was going to present. And so I will try to do. And I will share my presentation. I hope you can see it.
Yes, thanks, Edme.
Yes. So I'm going to try to link order to trade also to has been said regarding militarism, of course, but mostly linking what is happening to this situation. And I want to say that this diminishing of all that trade of development cooperation has to do with the general trend that is not new. It has been going on since the 90s. We see, for example, in the ACP countries and the European Union agreements, from Lomé process to Cotonou agreements in the year 2000, that we have a long-term trend of going from aid to trade, sustainable development integration in the world economy and political cooperation. They were saying in this Cotonou agreement. And the main pillars of this agreement was economic and trade cooperation and political dialogue. And that's where we see also the creation in the early 2000 of EPAs, these partnerships with Africa and looking for new free trade agreements in the global south. So this aid for trade was a new campaign launched by the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in 2005. And then it was operationalized 2006 in this first global review of aid for trade held at the WTO in November 2007. This was a way to legitimize the decrease in aid for cooperation and development cooperation to create the conditions for low development countries to adapt to this integration in global chains of productions at the time. I'm speaking of early 2000 and coming from the 90s. And this was through assistance for infrastructure, roads, harbors, to adapt to international standards, capacity training, combining, and very important, combining public and private capital in different projects. How this affects women? Well, several projects on empowering women in an economic way through capacity building, but also encouraging very much private entrepreneurship. This was the focus on women as exporters more than on women as workers for export firms in industry like maquilas, this chain of production, and agro-industry. So it was insisting more on creating women as independent economic actors than in improving their capacity for organizing collectively. And the most recent scenario that we are having today, all of you have spoken about that, the geopolitical scenario created by war in Europe with Russian invasion of Ukraine in the case of Europe, raises the priority of defense equipment, as we have seen. And this goes to a general trend to diminish this development aid more than before. both from the USA, as we saw with Trump, and from the European Union. In the European Union, several budgets are being constrained, and some reports, for example, from Aid Watch, note that this development aid as percentage of the GNA has fallen in some countries or is below the 0.7 target. Instead of long-term development aid, there's more emphasis on humanitarian aid, global crisis, for example, Ukraine, or climate disasters, and the global gateway strategy. For example, in Sweden, nearly all development aid, as Eva has said, goes to Ukraine. What is the global gateway? This is not officially presented as a cut to development aid, but many analysts and NGOs point out it changes the balance of EU external action. It shifts emphasis towards mobilizing private and public investments and away from classic grant-based development assistance. It's also a response to China's Belt and Road, and it was announced in December 2021 as the EU's flagship international investment strategy. And it pledges up to 300 billion euros between 2021 2027 for digital, climate, energy, transport, health, and education projects linked to trade. Where do the resources for this global gate come from? The EU budget instruments, notably this NDIC Global Europe, the main development cooperation fund, from the European Investment Bank and other public development banks, and blended finance to attract private investors. It's also encouraging the search for new markets. It's part of the EU instruments to counter Trump's war through tariffs, but also to counter China's enormous trade expansion in the global south. It's trying to secure EU's access to raw materials, key raw materials, as we saw in other presentations. These are extremely important for both the energy transition and war infrastructure. And it's trying to regain the European Union's competitivity in key industrial sectors. But this is also affecting NGOs, especially those related to cooperation and global south partnerships, dealing with health, vaccines, AIDS, medicines, family planning, safe abortion. All this is going away, with women capacity programs and projects against sexual violence also disappearing or having less and less funds. Such cuts coincide with the general gender backlashes that we see all over the world, but especially in authoritarian countries like Russia, China, India, Iran, by the rise and empowering of these ultra-right groups in Europe and elsewhere that react very forcefully against women's empowerment in general, with discourses on traditional family values. Other consequence of these cuts to cooperation projects, backlashes in health projects, as I have already mentioned, in the struggle against gender-based violence. And in this context of economic crisis and conflicts in several countries in the global south, this triggers more migration waves when most migration target countries close their borders. So the general insecurity is spoken in broad terms, increases and fuels tensions. Trade cannot solve these problems, but also because it has never been a solution to poverty and inequality, as we know. So there is some resistance. Concord, Europe, the European Network Dev and Development, Eurodad, as well as ETGC, the European Coalition for Trade and Justice, and the European Parliament's own research service are all critical to Global Gateway and this trend to cut development cooperation. Most EU's free trade agreements and association agreements have charters on trade and sustainable development, but these are very difficult to enforce. The mechanisms given to civil society to monitor them are very weak, and they are not binding, but they could be strengthened. So even in these TSD chapters, gender perspectives and concerns are less and less mentioned. So my final reflections are such trends as aid for trade and the global gateway are not new. They follow the same trends started in the 90s neoliberal hegemony. Trusting trade to do the trick, as I said before. There is an inherent contradiction. The lack of development aid worsens already difficult situations and triggers more and more migration that rich countries want to stop. Moreover, the lack of development cooperation erodes all goodwill and soft power that was cultivated before, leaving the terrain to more authoritarian countries like China and Russia to fill the void, and these are not good alternatives. So thank you, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Edme, and for helping us frame that more recent years, aid has not really been for development, but really to facilitate in goods and services and facilitate also investment and agreements between, for example, EU and the Global South, and has cuts deep into consequences on women, on migration patterns, and other exacerbated social ills. Thank you for that. And so at this point, I would like to thank our four speakers for sharing in your insights and adding your voices to this conversation. And as we've said earlier, we will provide a few moments for participants' questions that we would like to direct to our speakers, and if that would be okay. But just to check on our time, it's 7:23. And if we can ask participants for a couple of minutes more, maybe 10 minutes more, beyond our scheduled time for this webinar, which is at 7:30, so we can have the space for discussions and conversations, questions from participants, if that's okay. So we can accommodate a few questions or comments, pairings from our participants. Yes. We can, if it's okay, just a couple of minutes more. Okay, I see some thumbs up. Thank you very much. So at this point, we can also see, maybe we can have hands up from participants if you'd like to say something, questions for our speakers. Okay, as others may be at this point still coming up with your questions, maybe I can first. I have a question actually for our speakers. Anyone can answer. But I was just thinking, at this current point where we see a lot of tumultuous tensions globally, and how this also impacts and props up further neoliberal trade. What do you think are necessary or paramount points for us women, for the social movements and for women's movements across the globe, to, if there are like, maybe you could name a few points of unity on issues or themes that we can maybe work together in dealing with the situation of increasing militarism, trade rivalries. So that's a question. Can also collect more questions before we give the floor to our speakers to respond. And I see a hand raised from one of our participants, Fred Lin.
Yes, good morning.
Yes,
Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much to all the speakers for really informative, passionate, and scary presentations in some ways, but also for the voice of hope that we can mobilize. My question is for the last speaker. In terms of trade and not aid, is there any discussion around even what's discussed when it comes to trade? Because with the WTO, the inequalities of trade, the fact that countries in the global south cannot cannot impose protectionist measures to help develop industries where they are at a position of strength to trade effectively or trade to have more resources. Is there any discussion around that in addition to to the ways in which it was framed? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Fedlin, for your question. Do we have another question? Okay, I'm gonna read out a question that one of our participants, Erica, wrote on the chat box. Thank you so much for this webinar. This question is for all speakers. Are any international engagements or fora in which you expect there to be opportunities to influence policy on trade and militarism? So international engagements or fora where you expect us to have opportunities to interrogate policies on trade and militarism. Okay. Okay. So maybe at this point, we can ask our speakers to respond. We have two questions directed to all speakers and one question directed specifically for Edme.
I'm afraid I didn't understand very well if there was any discussion on trade and how can we organize, but there are many discussions in several forums. I mean, regarding the European Union trade agreements with the Global South, for example, I'm in several networks that are precisely trying to stop or to modify these trade agreements and enforce also clauses that are within trade agreements that have not been given enough attention or enough force. So there are several ways of resistance among different organizations. I have only followed the ones regarding Mercosur and Mexico, but I'm also involved in the ones with Central America and the Andean countries. But yes, there are several discussions on this. How can we do? What are our alternatives? How can we stop these very bad deals, sometimes toxic deals that are being signed, etc. So yes, there are lots of discussions on that, if that can answer the question.
Thank you, Edme, for that response. Yeah. Okay. Can we hear from other speakers? Maybe a response to the questions.
I can. Jumps, may I?
Yes, please, Azra, go ahead.
So the question that you asked is, how can we unite? How can we come together? I think, of course, online is nowadays very, very common. And also, I think one should not think it's not worth it. I think it's worth it. You get to hear so many people. And it is also a bond, a unity that you can take. But I think our main focus remains our own masses, the farmers, the peasants, the women and the grassroots, the indigenous people, the informal workers. The change will only come if the people stand up. And the people in large numbers are those who are the most deprived. It's a very small percent in each of our countries that has, any form of privilege, a very small percentage. As activists, as people who have believe in change, believe that it has to come. We have to defeat imperialism. We have to defeat the United States, especially, which is one of the most corrosive powers. And I do not ignore Russia and the role of China. Both of them are equally as dangerous as the US, but by no means is their military power anywhere close to what the United States has. So unless and until we are able to mobilize our own grassroots communities, unless they feel, they know why they are being swept out of their lands, why they're being bombed, why are drones coming into their lands, why are so many hundreds of people are being disappeared, and why fascism has now taken root, we have very little chance of winning against the imperialists. And to me, that is the most critical of all interventions, to remain committed to working with the grassroots and remain committed to working with the people who are being most impoverished by not only the trade agreements, but the World Trade, like the World Bank, the IMF, and of course, transition of our resources. So that is one. In terms of how do we fight, I think self-sufficiency is key. We have become so enamored of modern technologies and modern uses that we feel that we cannot compete and we can never stand up. I'm speaking as a person from a new colonial country, which is totally subjugated by its own militarized government, but also by the militaries of the United States. And also now China has a very big hand in Pakistani politics. I feel that unless and until we have this determination to be self-sufficient, to be able to stand up and fight, and to show the world that indeed we are determined that we will win national liberation. I really take a lot of aspiration from what is happening in the Palestinian resistance. A small piece of land which is besieged by really, really atrocious governments across, from Saudi Arabia to Jordan to Israel itself, but they have stood up for 2 years. If they can do it, I don't think there is any limit to what we can do. So that is what I would really like to give as my input. Thank you.
Thank you, Azra, and thank you, Edme, for your answers. Perhaps Eva or Make could also respond. Okay,
I give I will give the floor to you, Nick. I'm just going to say there is someone who said that if these developed countries cut down aid for developing countries, that means they are disconnecting. Yes, we are. And I think for us, if we also need to see that we need to fight so much more on home ground for the world, because it started very much by blaming migrants for everything that is bad, although we actually desperately need them as well, but we don't talk about that. And that has made it much easier to talk about that we should only do development aid that gains Sweden, that gains us either financial with trade, that is the best, but otherwise it should be in our neighborhood, and we shouldn't really think about things that happens outside that, which is crazy in this time of globalization. So I think for us, our homework is to try to change the way Europe is going right now, because it's not going in any good direction.
Thank you, Eva.
Okay, so much to respond to, from points of unity to international spaces, right? And I think we're in a time where we're also watching like the erosion of international law, the dismantling of the court system to uphold protective measures, to the dismantling of protective measures. for the environment, for indigenous rights, for all kinds of issues, from disability issues to women's issues. And it can feel like there's, you know, there's no venue, sometimes, no international venue. Like, you know, the International Seabed Authority, which is under the United Nations, which is supposed to develop the policies for deep sea bed mining, for instance. You know, Native activists throughout the Pacific have been petitioning the ISA for years now to ask them to include and consider indigenous rights, you know, in the policies. And of course, they ignored all of those requests. It's extremely disheartening when so much labor and so much of our lives are spent to these fights, and, you know, these international frameworks just ignore us completely. And it's also an issue of environmental racism as well. You know, that these things could be done to brown peoples throughout, especially islands, right? And so it sometimes feels like there is no international mechanism that we could go to. Of course, we find, you know, whatever legal framework we can take internationally and in our own context, but that takes so long. They demand so many resources, even to go to attend some of these meetings, to testify, or to get a subject matter expert or a legal expert. It's very, very costly. And so there are a lot of limitations. And so I think one of our points of unity in response to that is, you know, especially as feminists, is to figure out ways to redistribute resources and support each other, you know, through shared labor, shared knowledge, shared networks. But also something that's really critical is to figure out ways we can disrupt the flow of funds to the weapons systems, to the weapons manufacturers. And we've seen, you know, of course, a lot of amazing efforts, you know, disrupting Maersk, for instance. All the ways that BDS has been successful, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement for Palestine. We really need to find those similar ways of disrupting the flow of money for you know, these issues, for deep sea mining, for those weapons manufacturing that depends on those minerals, and of course, you know, for the building of the submarines. We've got to really reestablish connections with our labor movements, our labor unions. We really need to reconnect at the grassroots level with our own people, you know, dock workers, fisher folk, everybody, to share knowledge, share information, so people feel empowered. They don't necessarily have to consent to the mechanisms that are imposed upon us, but they can still oppose and critique them. And it's so important that we help to develop these skills among ourselves and in our community, so that our folks can find a way to deal through these processes that are often not thinking about indigenous people and communities on the margins. So thank you so much for these questions. Really appreciate all the panelists and all of you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Nick. Okay. We have participants who wants to speak. But before that, I thank all our speakers for your responses and for keeping our conversation how in the face of all this, that we can still look into ways of asserting our solidarity amongst women.
Jones, you are cutting out.
So,
It's difficult to hear you.
yes, we can have the space for our participant, Krishanti, to speak. Okay. Krishanti wants to speak. We can give her the floor before we go and wrap our webinar. Are you still there? Sorry. Okay. Okay, I see your message. Make sorry for my bad internet connection. But at this, yeah, at this point, we'd like to call on Krishanti. She wants to speak. Yeah. Brief intervention. Okay. Is she still here?
She needs to help to unmute her mic, she writes. Unmute her mic is the English.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Krishanti, please try.
Okay. You have your okay, where is she?
Krishanti, maybe you can write your comments or any question in the chat if you can't unmute, because we have asked you to unmute.
I think your microphone is now on, Krishanti.
Zoms, I think we
Okay.
can.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm really sorry, but Krishanti, yeah, you can still speak on the chat box, but I think at this point we really have to, we don't want to eat up much time of our participants and our speakers. So once again, we'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar and for being in this space where we can converse about the difficult issues, some of the many difficult issues concerning trends in global trade and how this has also exacerbated political and military rivalries of various powers, global powers, and what this means to women, especially women in the global south, but also women across the globe, and how this becomes a moment not only to raise our voices, raise our issues and demands, but also a moment to question and disrupt business as usual for the militarists, the imperialists, and the colonizers that have been instrumental in keeping systems of inequalities and for a system that puts priorities for profits, for hegemony over the interests of true development for the people and of achieving women's rights. So thank you everyone again for being part of this webinar. And we hope that in future conversations with the Gender and Coalition and in the many spaces that we can come together as social movements, as activists, and as women's rights, human rights defenders, we can all come together again in the next instances or opportunities such as this. So thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And thank you for being part of our webinar for today. Thank you.